The soldiers who perpetrated the murders are now free men living in the UK. Although the British government has admitted to the killings, the families of the victims are calling for criminal prosecutions. Roshan Mohammed Saleh reports.
40 years after the massacre by British soldiers of 14 civil rights protesters in Derry, Northern Ireland, the people of the town came out in their thousands to mark the event. Some have vowed that this will be the last commemoration march because the British government has admitted responsibility for Bloody Sunday and cleared all but one of the protesters' names. But for others, the search for justice continues.
My brother was shot as he was crawling away from the rubble barricade. He was shot in the backside and the bullet travelled up through his body and came out under his arm.
Well, my father and my brother went out on what was considered a peaceful march to protest against anti-internment, and by the end of that march my brother, my 19-year-old brother, was dead.
The mural behind me depicts the 14 people who were murdered by British soldiers on Bloody Sunday. It's 40 years ago since that day, but feelings in this area of Derry still run very high. Many people want to see the soldiers responsible for the murders prosecuted.
My brother was murdered in 1972 as a second-class citizen. I believe that we live in a new era, and if democracy is truly in place in our country, that the natural consequence where murder has taken place, the state authorities must pursue those who committed those acts.
I think people have struggled enough. They've struggled for 40 years, and my own view is that I'm prepared to move on with my own life, and I don't like the thought of having my future in any way sort of curtailed or threatened by whether the soldier who killed my father is prosecuted or not.
Derry has become synonymous worldwide with Bloody Sunday, when 13 Irish Catholics were shot dead by British soldiers during a civil rights march in 1972. Another later died of his injuries and 13 more were wounded. For many years, the British Army maintained that the civil rights protesters were armed, had become violent and had instigated a gunfight. But following a public inquiry, the Prime Minister David Cameron finally apologised in 2010 and said the shooting by the army was reckless and unjustifiable.
Savile's report and Cameron's speech in the House of Commons was amazing. It was truly amazing. And his word of the use sorry and unjustified and unjustifiable and indefensible were truly wonderful to hear a British Prime Minister make those admissions in Parliament and for the world to hear those admissions.
The conflict in the British-occupied province, which has killed thousands, has political and religious roots that are centuries old. Some people, especially the Protestants, who form a wafer-thin majority, believe it should remain part of the United Kingdom. Others, particularly the Catholic community, believe it should leave the UK and become part of the Republic of Ireland. But since the dark days of the 70s, 80s and 90s, a power-sharing executive between the Protestants and the Catholics has been set up. The guns have largely remained silent since, although London still exercises sovereignty. It's a similar mixed picture for Derry. British soldiers have withdrawn from the streets, but Westminster remains in control against the wishes of most of the Catholic population, which still complains of discrimination. The recession has also hit Derry hard. Jobs are rare and many are on state benefits. So the irony is, while a good proportion want independence from British rule, they are also dependent on it.
Well, I think the city's doing not too bad. We're struggling along economically. Of course, we could always do better, but I mean, I think we're like the rest of the world, suffering with that. Community relations are improving all the time. We're not a perfect society, but we're getting there.
The British create, they don't solve a problem. They create more enemies. Because if I never had any dislike for the British government or British soldiers, I certainly have now.
We shall overcome someday.
In the years following Bloody Sunday, huge numbers of Catholics were radicalised, coming to believe that it was only through the expulsion of British forces and the unification of Ireland that proper freedom could be attained. 40 years on, community relations remain tense and sporadic violence still erupts. And the dream of a united Ireland has yet to be realised. Derry has come a long way since Bloody Sunday. On the positive side, British soldiers no longer patrol the streets, and the British government has admitted liability over the killings. But as long as the soldiers that murdered the protesters on Bloody Sunday remain free, many people in the city won't be able to get any closure. Roshan Mohammed Salih, Press TV in Derry, Northern Ireland.